The Return of the Mount Hua Sect. Chapter 133. Now my work starts. Muin, a disciple of the 22nd generation of the great Wudang sect. One of the Wudang sect's first-class disciples standing among the three swords of Wudang. He was known as the Clear Flowing Sword. He had quite a few other names to describe him as well. What was certain was his role within Wudang's upper echelon. Basically, the sect leader and elders decide a sect's plans and operations, while the ones who execute such matters are the first-class disciples. Muin is one of those first-class disciples. Everyone he met praised him, and everyone in the world supported him as well. But there was an exception to everything. He met someone who completely disregarded his existence for the first time today. Mount Hua's divine dragon. Muin glared at the masked man in front of him with cold eyes. Is he some mindless idiot that doesn't think things through? There is no way such a fool could defeat the second-class disciples of Wudang. Muin thought that Chongmyeong must have some additional trick up his sleeve. But it was overly arrogant to believe that petty tricks would be enough to ignore Muin. The tip of Muin's sword quietly headed for Chongmyeong. No further conversation was necessary. If there was something that either wanted, they would clash their swords and take it. Such is the way of the martial world. Infinite light on the path. Muin recited a sutra, and Chongmyeong shook his head as if such words were annoying. The form's good. There was a strong feeling of stability. Even seen through Chongmyeong's critical eyes, there weren't any extremely offensive flaws. There's a reason that the second-class disciples showed such excessive respect for this man. Chongmyeong didn't know who this man was, but he was certain the man must have a solid reputation in Gangho. The second-class disciples turned out to be nothing. However, it wasn't some second-class disciple in front of Chongmyeong now, but a true swordsman of Wudang that was aiming for Chongmyeong. He was a warrior with a razor-sharp momentum that seemed keen to sever flesh at any moment. That fact caused Chongmyeong's lips to curl into a smile. At this level, he is naturally the best among those Chongmyeong had faced after his reincarnation. But, just one thing before we begin. Muin's eyebrows twitched. You aren't going to foolishly pretend that nothing's happened, right? As if. I just wanted to make a bet. Bet? Yes. Chongmyeong grinned as he continued. It would be pretty miserable if we gave our best efforts, won, and got nothing out of it, right? So how about the loser grants one thing to the winner? I want to hear about the sword tomb or something like that. Muin looked at Chongmyeong. Despite Chongmyeong's face being obscured by a mask, Muin could see a smile oozing from his eyes. How dare you smile in front of me? Sure. Oh, are you really okay with it? Instead, if you lose, you'll have to take off that mask, bow your head in apology, and admit that Mount Hua is no match for the Wudang. Huh? You made a mistake. I'm not from Mount Hua. But that's fine. I'll do it. Chongmyeong shrugged his shoulders. But don't try and take it back when you lose. Hearing that provocation, Muin's face contorted. I am a disciple of Wudang. Bite your tongue. I will never go back on my word. Oh, so inspiring. Chongmyeong smiled. This is how kids are. If you scratch them a little, they start running wild. Now, let's quit wasting time and get started. Bring it on. It was an attitude that clearly disrespected the opponent. Shortly after Chongmyeong spoke, Muin began to release a vicious and murderous aura. Sayoung, will this be fine? Jinhyun couldn't answer his saje. He struggled to understand just why he was unable to answer. The masked man was obviously Mount Hua's divine dragon. The outline of his body and his tone of voice. Above all, His insane attitude left no room for doubt. But we don't know anything about his skills. When they confronted the disciples of Mount Hua, this man sat behind and just watched them all. Not once had he pulled out his sword. Judging from that, perhaps he would be the strongest among the disciples of Mount Hua that were there. He won't take the stage for someone at your level. We raise our swords against those that match our skills. Right, that was what Jinhyun's opponent said. The righteous sword of Hua. But even then, it should be impossible for Mount Hua's divine dragon to defeat Muin. They had at least a 30-year age difference between them, and Muin stands at the peak of power within his generation. This guy was planning on fighting someone with 30 years more experience than him. No matter how you looked at it, this fight was not between equals. However, was the outcome of every fight predetermined by the difference in age between the warriors? A genius might be able to battle against their seniors, but that should only extend one generation. How could it be possible to beat a man who is closer in age to one's grandfather than father? When Muin joined the Gangho, Chongmyeong couldn't have even been born yet. The wealth of experience this man had was something Chongmyeong could never measure up to in his short life. Jinhyun was fully aware of all that. But why do I feel this anxious? Jinhyun bit his lip. He was surprised to see this man behaving so strongly and confidently here. Jinhyun himself had lost the battle earlier this morning, something he had never imagined, so he couldn't calmly accept the situation. Chongmyeong's relaxed posture made him even more anxious. No, Jinhyun's eyes were bloodshot as he stared at him. It was shameful that Jinhyun lost to the righteous sword of Hua, but that was as far as that goes. However, if Muin lost to Chongmyeong, then that would signal a true defeat. If that happens, the Wudang will always be considered lesser than Mount Hua. At least, it will remain so for as long as Chongmyeong lives. That cannot happen. No way. Jinhyun was beginning to lose his mind. Standing at the end of Muin's sword was Chongmyeong. Muin believed that it may be a bit excessive to be dealing with a young swordsman nearly half his age. However, he had no plans to back down now. The opponent not only disregarded and disgraced the Wudang sect, but now he was directly picking a fight with him. It was only natural to punish such a person. Mount Hua's divine dragon. This young one's title. It was a name that even Muin had grown tired of hearing. A divine dragon that erupted from the dying Mount Hua. It was rare to find such an exciting tale that ignited the imagination of others. The impetuous didn't hesitate to rank him among the strongest martial artists in the world. There hasn't been any significant activity from him since the Jeonnam conference 2 years ago, so the excitement surrounding him had died down a bit. But in the end, fame is just a facade. What matters are the deeds done to earn that reputation. If all the Jeonnam conference rumors were indeed true, then this man in front of Muin, Chongmyeong, was not to be underestimated. Which is why he has to be cut down right now. He glared at Chongmyeong. At first glance, this man didn't seem to be very strong. Martial training develops the body. As a warrior trains, the ki inside the body matures, and their growth can naturally be perceived by others, even if they don't intend to show it off. Every movement becomes refined and follows the logic of their technique. The essence of their ki flows out implicitly. Therefore, even without crossing swords, one can determine the strength of their opponent to some extent. However, Muin couldn't feel anything at all from this masked man in front of him. If he hadn't gotten so close and tried to enact some ridiculous plan to deceive him, Muin might have really believed he was a robber. No, he would still be an insane robber though. He couldn't understand. Was he strong or weak? Was he sane or had he completely lost his mind? It seemed as if all the chaos in the world had coalesced and taken human form. Enough with the staring contest. Can we get started? Are you asking me to move first? Yes. Me? Mujin's eyebrows twitched. Did he really expect him to jump in? He claimed that he wasn't one of Mount Hua's disciples, but it was clear that this man was Chungmyeong. But now, he wanted to give Mujin the first strike in battle, a man with 2 generations of seniority. Your arrogance is unmatched. Fine, then I'll come. Don't regret it though. You! A scream that only lasted a moment. Pat! Something brushed past Mujin's face as the air cracked. Drip. Only when warm blood dripped down his cheek did Mujin realize that it was Chungmyeong's sword. Consider that my greeting. Chungmyeong chuckled. At that moment, Mujin gave up any feelings of disrespect he had for Chungmyeong. If he had aimed for my neck, my head would have already gone flying. Careless. No, he wasn't the least bit careless. Chungmyeong's sword was several times faster than he thought. Mujin bit his lips tightly. An indefensible mistake happened, but there was still room for redemption. So, Mujin clenched his hand, holding the sword. Thank you for your consideration. A thanks? Chungmyeong shrugged his shoulders. If you're grateful, then do it properly, rather than doing it in moderation. Of course. A light shone in Mujin's eyes. I was thinking the same. Mujin's feet slammed to the ground as he rushed towards Chungmyeong at a blurring speed. Chungmyeong's eyes shone. Right! The clear flowing sword, Mujin. Even Chungmyeong, who wasn't interested in current affairs, had heard this name at least once. It can be said that he was rather famous. So, show me everything you have. So Chungmyeong could finally find out what difference was there between the martial world 100 years ago compared to now. How great have the martial arts developed over the years? Or had it weakened after being overturned in the war with the Heavenly Demon Sect? The Jongnam sect didn't serve as a proper gauge. Their martial arts had been sullied and deteriorated. Moreover, Chungmyeong's opponents were only second-class disciples. They weren't strong enough. But Mujin served as a proper metric. Wudang. Mujin's sword was wrapped in a deep blue key. Is that Taiching? Something very similar to sword key rushed ahead like waves. Endless great river. The endless swordsmanship of the Wudang. To maintain that mighty flow, a huge amount of ki is needed. This is the reason that Wudang's second-class disciples cannot serve as a proper measure. The martial arts of the Wudang sect are amazing. It is a true art focused on long-term development. The Wudang's unique methods of receiving their opponent's techniques to flow softly and seize the opportunity to counter and overwhelm the enemy is complemented by their enormous reserve of ki. It can be seen here. The ki continued to stably flow from the sword like a raging river. Chungmyeong narrowed his eyes slightly as he looked at this deep blue sword ki rushing towards him. Clear flowing sword. A man worthy of the name. But this much won't be enough. Chungmyeong's sword slowly pointed ahead. At the tip of his sword was a glimmer of ki, sharing the red color of the setting sun. Wudang. The sunset red-colored sword ki parted the raging river from side to side. Mujin was shocked. He cut it. He had split his sword ki. Nonsense! Before he even realized it, Mujin was shouting out loud. Wudang's sword ki was meant to be endless. A sword ki that never breaks and ceaselessly continues to propagate. but that sword was split so easily. Muin retrieved his sword and once again imbued ki into it. Endless great river. The ki that was emitted from the sword flowed into a boundless blue, growing deeper and more vibrant. The ki that was brought from Muin's dungeon fully resonated with his sword. The sword ki of Wudang is the sword of nature. Nature is benevolent, but sometimes more ferocious than anything. Just as humans cannot stop the waters of a coursing river, fighting against this flowing sword ki seemed futile. Perfect. Muin had full confidence in the technique he had just unleashed. No matter how talented the opponent was, he would not be able to handle this. It was the most perfectly executed swordsmanship of his sect. With this sword. Just then, a flash of red followed after an annoyed voice. At the same time, Muin's sword ki, which was rushing for the opponent, was bounced back in all directions and crushed. An enormous recoil traveled down Muin's wrist, and he lost his balance for a moment, causing him to fall to the ground. Thud. He looked at the masked man who was waving his sword in front of him. There's nothing to see here either. The masked man shook his head and grabbed his sword tightly as he walked towards Muin. What nonsense! The 3 swords of Wudang? With that ability? Let's start with a light beating first. Chongmyung rushed towards Muin without delay.